sort of thing orchestrated, right?
And then we have to go to Saghalie Trustee who's presenting to the Saghalie Trustee.
Okay. All right.
So I'm just trying to figure out where to have Jeff sit so that
Yeah. Yeah, I would think that would be fine. You can pull up an empty chair up front.
he would, watch out.
I know. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here. Nice to meet you. I gotta go get out of the way.
Oh. Do you want to do that? I know we're not.
You want to hear another Marie joke? Hear another? Do you want to hear another Marie joke? Marie sounds great. There he goes. He snaps back right away. Marie says to go on. Or just kind of make it. I feel like this is okay. There we go. I'm facing this way.
Hard to see faces.
Kung.
She's probably late, but
Did she go to Olympia then after this morning? Okay. Yeah, we have the people here from OSPI, so we're
light.
Let there be light.
You ready? Call this meeting to order. So first this evening we'll do roll call. Director Eto, if you can start us, please.
Hiroshiato, District 5.
Claire Wilson, District 2.
Jeffrey McAnalloy, Director.
Director Danny Peterson.
Sally McLean, Superintendent.
Thank you. We'll now have the presentation of the colors from the Federal Way High School JROTC. If you can please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll be seated. So our first item this evening is the adoption of our agenda. Do I hear a motion?
I so move.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not hearing any discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is the approval of the consent agenda. Do I have an adoption to accept?
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda of February 24th, 2015 as submitted.
Second that motion.
A motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. So now we have a presentation from Vince Blauser.
Well, good evening, President McAnalloy, members of the board, Superintendent McLean. It's with great excitement that I inform you this evening that Saghalie Middle School has been recognized as a STEM Lighthouse school by the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction for their educational model in science, technology, engineering, and math education, also referred to as STEM. This award carries with it a $20,000 grant. Pretty impressive. Saghalie is one of only 6 schools statewide to receive this award this year. We are very excited that because of Saghalie's STEM journey, which began 5 years ago, being designated as a Lighthouse school means that Saghalie will be helping a number of schools throughout this state. This designation is a combination of Saghalie's school hard work and their emphasis on student-centered learning, and we're very proud and honored that they have been selected. And so at this time, I would like to invite to the podium Clarence Dancer from OSPI to say a few words and present the award. Mr. Dancer.
Thank you for
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. We're going to just open up the banner. So. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. My name is Clarence Dancer, Jr. I am the STEM Program Supervisor for OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And this is a great opportunity for me. I'm excited. Quite often, we're in our office and we're looked upon as the ones who are dropping the hammer. But to have an opportunity to recognize the schools and to honor the work that the folks are doing within the schools is really, truly a pleasure for me. This grant started in 2010. And in 2010, there were 2 key pushes that went forth within STEM. One was to create a group that really looked at putting together a plan of action for STEM education for Washington State. Another push was this grant. And the idea for this grant was to provide up to $20,000 for 6 schools throughout the state of Washington each year that we felt were really doing an outstanding job in not just STEM. And sometimes when we think of STEM, we think of robotics or different activities, but really engaging STEM within the school structure. And Saghalie, I found, did this exceptionally well. And what I was excited to see was not only what was on their application, but when I actually had an opportunity to visit the school and to see how STEM is truly ingrained, and it's not just one person's vision or one person's mission. The entire school has bought into this idea of STEM, and it is truly, truly integrated in everything they do. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in seeing the toys and seeing the students be engaged. We forget that the teachers are also excited and the teachers are also being engaged around this. And it's really changing the culture of education throughout Washington State. And so I'm excited about this opportunity and what they can do, what Saghalie can do for education moving forward, not only in this district, but also throughout the state of Washington. So enough of me talking. If I can have the staff from Saghalie come, and I think you also have a couple of students. I'll give you all an opportunity to say some words, but if I can read the plaque that we have provided from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to recognize the great work that you're doing. And it reads, Saghalie Middle School, Washington STEM Lighthouse School, 2014-2015. Exemplary instruction in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, awarded by Washington State Legislature, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Randy Dorn. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm going to have, as the principal of Saghalie, I'm going to actually turn it over to the people that are really doing the work, the teachers and the students, because we're very proud of just, if you've seen the test results of Saghalie, or have been in Saghalie recently, you could see a school that is just growing, and it's where everybody's excited to learn. In fact, I just came from a family event where we are, right now, all the staff and the students are learning more about Saghalie. And there's about 200 people there right now, and they're learning a bit more, they're learning together, and it's just an exciting time. And so it's a very exciting, and we're very honored to be awarded this from the state superintendent's office. But let's hear from the people that are really doing the work. First, I'd like to introduce Sharon Norton, who's our 7th grade dean of students, who also leads our STEM committee. So I wanted to thank her personally and have her say a few words.
Thank you. I guess this journey began to what do we believe about teaching and learning, and that's really where we began and continue to grow. What do we believe about teaching and learning, and whatever we have to do, it has to be what's best for kids. And if it's not best for kids, we shouldn't do it. And so that's been our cornerstone. The other thing is looking at it's not about any one person or any one committee or any one group of teachers or staff. Whatever happens with STEM or whatever you call the instructional strategy or the thing of the day, it has to sustain itself long past any of us are in the room, because it's all about the kids, it's this generation, and it's the next generation. So we're really excited because we're always learning, and we make mistakes, and we say, what did we learn from that? Let's try something different. And because of that, I really believe is why we've been recognized, because we keep learning and making it better. So you're not going to see at Saghalie one night a year that's our STEM event night. It doesn't happen. We had a showcase last month. There were about 150 people, and it was technology and arts and music. And tonight it's something different. But if it's authentic, we're finding out it's what works for our kids and what works for our families, which is exciting. So thank you all very much. I want to introduce a couple of 7th grade students that can speak from their experience too. So the first up is Destiny, and then Dahlia, you can come beside her.
I feel Saghalie has a very nice STEM program because we do lots of nice and fun STEM projects, and we interact with each other. Like, we will have groups and we get to do our projects, and I feel like it's really fun.
Saghalie is honestly a really great school because we make sure nobody gets left out, and we're really hard workers, and we have a really good environment.
Is there an opportunity to get a picture with you, Mr. McAnalloy and Ms. McLean? From here, we'll unveil this. And how about you guys want one? And the lights are a little bit in the grade. Please, come on up. Right there. Great. Yeah.
So now's the time for public comment. There is some blue forms on that back table. If you're interested in giving public comment, you fill one of those out and bring it up. So the first comment we have this evening is from Lydia Asefa Dawson on the baccalaureate program.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Lydia Safadasan, and I'm a parent of 2 former students who graduated from Federal Way High School. And in 2013, my son asked me if we could do baccalaureate for Federal Way High School, which we did. And then the following year, we followed it up by opening it up to all the Federal Way School District schools, all the high schools in the district. So we want to continue with that legacy and continue doing it. So the first year we did it at Our Savior's Baptist Church on 320th. They were very gracious and gave us the space. And then this year St. Luke's Church, Lutheran Church. So currently the date is March 7th. But we would also like to encourage any parents who would be interested in helping us plan this event. And so if the school also could put it on the school calendar, and I don't know if that's possible. So we're just putting it out there, letting everybody know that this is happening at St. Luke's, and everyone's welcome. So thank you very much.
And you meant to say June 7th, correct? Not
Did
March
I say-
7th? You said March 7th, but I'm sure you meant June 7th, correct?
I said that earlier too. Thank you. June 7th, Sunday.
Do you have a time?
2 o'clock?
Thank you.
Yes. So.
Lydia, can you explain for someone who may not know what that is, what that event is, and who would be welcome to come? Because I don't know if everyone has ever experienced that or has been invited or been part of an event like that before.
Okay. So this is a service for everyone is welcome, by the way. So it is a religious service or program for students. It's just to bless them and to send them off, you know, in a way that is very, again, Christian-centered. But it really, when we did it, the first time we did it was really beautiful because at graduation you have 200, 300 students graduating at the same time. And you just say their name and they go across the stage and they're done. And so this just it's more intimate and more unifying just because it's something that brings the kids together at a place that is really common and comfortable. And so we just have a short program where the kids are also involved, and there's going to be like a message, and that's it. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Gloria Butts on fairness.
Thank you for having me. My name is Gloria. I have 3 children that are currently in the Federal Way School District. And my question to the district is, why do the Federal Way School District continue to support assaults and racial discrimination against African American children within this district? Our children have experienced such harsh environment as the Little Rock 9 did in 1957. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next is superintendent comments. Superintendent McLean.
Thank you, President McAnalloy. I have a few comments this evening that are basically highlights of some of the work that's occurred over the last 2 weeks. Therese Moore has been hosting a quarterly coffee with the superintendent where various parents come and meet with me, and we have opportunities to chat about issues that are of concern to them and emerging issues at the district. And I always appreciate those informal opportunities to get to hear from a parent's perspective how things are going in our individual schools. We did learn at the last meeting that one of our parents has been recognized as an unsung hero. So that event is actually tonight in Lacey, but it was a ticket-only event, so we're not able to be there to applaud him, but hope to bring him to the board at a future point in time. We hosted a week ago the last Federal Way High School open house, which gave people a chance once more to come through and look at the various design boards for the new Federal Way High School construction, sign up for a brick, And you can still sign up for a brick from the oldest part of Federal Way High School, the part of the building that was first opened in 1938, at any point in time. Those bricks actually won't be available for a couple years, so don't worry. You've got time to sign up for those. Demolition of the southwest wing started on the 18th, so we're about a week into demolition, and that so far is moving along with only, one or two unexpected surprises, as you would expect with a building as old as Federal Way High School. I also had an opportunity to meet with a group of our community-based organizations this last Thursday. For me, that was really a listening opportunity to get to listen around the table as various community partners talked about the ways they're engaged with our school district, with our students, and with our families. And I really appreciated that opportunity to hear about the different kinds of supports that are occurring, and look forward to leveraging that resource as we move forward with our work. Had two opportunities to work with Advancing Leadership. For those of you who aren't aware of Advancing Leadership is really a homegrown leadership program that has been recognized in many ways, but they have an adult community-based leadership program, and then they have two youth programs. They have Advancing Leadership Youth and then Advancing Leadership Youth 2.0 for the students who are still with us and haven't graduated. With Advancing Leadership last week, I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about public education in the state of Washington, and I know you won't be surprised to hear that I got on my soapbox around the financial inequities that continue to exist in state funding formulas, and you'll probably hear more about that from me. Well, you will hear more about that from me at our March 3rd work study. Advancing Leadership Youth is on a shorter project timeline that aligns with the school year, and this last Saturday, they actually hosted their culminating project at Grace Church, which was an event planned between teens and the City of Federal Way Police Department. And they did sort of an amazing race or great race activity for kids to go through various 10 stations to go through. They were playing basketball and had various police equipment available for people to see. The robots that do the bomb squad or the bomb reviews was there, as was another little handy-dandy robot. So they were it was quite interesting actually to be there. They did also prepare a 15-minute video, a Jump Street video that we are working with Advancing Leadership to acquire, so we can post it on our website and or at least link to the Advancing Leadership webpage. So 15 minutes is a little long to show in a board meeting, but I think it would be worth your while to go take a peek at. We have, I will defer to Director Wilson to talk about the work that's gearing up for Thursday night. And I just want to then point out that on Thursday also we have our first ever Teacher Palooza event. And this is an opportunity where we are working very early in the recruiting process to recruit and hire teachers a little bit ahead of our normal timeframes, as we know that recruiting has become a challenge for us. We're looking forward to trying to contract with as many teachers as we can, either teachers who are working for us right now, who are on limited contracts, maybe our student teachers, and I know Rick Cerns could talk more specifically about some of the outside places where we've connected with, but some teachers are actually graduating here at the end of first semester. Believe it or not, we still have some openings we haven't been able to fill all year, so if we can fill a couple of those as a result of Teacher Palooza, that would be great. So this is a change in hiring practices. We're not going out as big as perhaps some would like us to, but basically what this does is it hires teachers into a pool rather than directly into a building. And so that's a shift in business practice, and we want to make sure we get the right teachers for the right schools and the right positions that we we'll have open, which we don't know yet. So that's the delicate balance between trying to get out in the market early to get our teachers and then trying to ensure that we have appropriate places for them in the fall. But I'm very excited about that and look forward to dropping by and seeing all that enthusiasm on Thursday. And that concludes my comments for this evening.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent McLean. Excuse me. So next are school board comments. Director Peterson, would you like to start us this evening? Sure.
Just to touch off on the advancing leadership, I was actually here when the new director, Lawrence Garrett, was presenting to our middle school and high school principals about the selection process for this next year. And Terry Hickle is there as well, and obviously we as a district know we appreciate her for all of her work through the years for the bonds and levies and all that stuff. And I know that on March 3rd, she's actually going to be receiving the key to the city, from what I understand. City of Federal is going to be honoring her, and so we're just grateful for her and her contribution to our community. And that it's also had some, as you talked about too, the tearing down of Federal Way High School. I've been driving by a couple times a week, and just, a tree comes down or a building here and there, and it's good just to see progress as we're moving forward with that. I keep getting questions all the time, coffee shops, at the mall, wherever, people asking about the superintendent search, where we're at with that. And I know that, obviously tomorrow, the closing of that search and how we're moving forward with that. I was able to also attend a couple weeks ago, went to couple of different basketball games the Federal Way. TJ game was fun to go to, and I know right now our middle schools have some basketball going on. It's fun to see in the sports participation going on in our district. And I'd also just want to highlight too, I've appreciated our communications department, and I've just noted that there's just been just a greater diligence to really doing a great job communicating, highlighting some of the great stuff going on in our district and being really proactive, and I appreciate that. And I think it's great. And also today I was over at school, and I know we're starting some of our testing, Smarter Balance and that kind of stuff, and just curious right now as we start moving into testing how technology and how that's all going to, with computers and all that. I know that was a couple of the schools were, was it Tacoma School District or Puyallup a couple weeks ago in the News Tribune, how they were talking about their concerns with technology. But I know we've been diligent with that, and it just, as with anything, first time, and as you do implement something new, just something I'm sure we'll be getting a report on to the board how that testing season goes as we go here this spring. So, but yeah, I just appreciate the work going on in our district, the amazing staff we have, and glad to be here tonight. Thank you.
Vice President Wilson.
Well, I want to just give an update that we have our GLE Advisory Committee, our first meeting on Thursday. We have some good response from the folks that we invited, and look forward to reporting back on how the first gathering goes, and we'll be able to hopefully make the materials that we're using in the meeting somewhere public, so if people are interested, they could actually see the anchor documents and things we're looking at. Second thing I want to do is a shout out to Beamer Girls and to Federal Way High School Boys, both district champs in basketball, so put that on my Facebook page because it's something to shout out about. And then the third thing is I have an opportunity this year to be part of the 2015 cohort of Leadership WASDA. And Leadership WASDA is the Washington State School Directors Association, has a statewide leadership year-long professional learning opportunity for board directors across the state. And this year I'm one of 13 board directors. And the districts really range from very, very small to sizes like Federal Way and a little larger. Thought that you would be interested in who they might be, and two of them do operate under policy governance, although how that's defined by board directors is a little different, so that's another story. But Lake Washington, Pasco, Washougal, Central Kitsap, Mount Baker, Cedro-Woolley, Harrington, Ferndale, Enumclaw, Sunnyside, North Kitsap, and Shelton are currently represented in this year's class. So spent 2 days down in Olympia, all day Friday and Saturday, and had the opportunity to spend the afternoon at OSPI with Superintendent Dorn and Assistant Superintendent Bob Butts, and really just talking about influence and the state of education and kind of what the world looks like from the superintendent seat related to policy and what's happening in the legislature. And also spent a lot of time with Marcy Maxwell, who's the governor's education policy advisor, who also in the past has been a school board director in Renton, so had a really good perspective. The other thing that was kind of interesting and also exciting was we heard from the WASDA executive board and members that had just come back from DC as part of the Federal Regulations Network, and our new incoming WASDA board chair happens to be a graduate of Federal Way High School. So he made sure to come up and share that with me, and his name is Chris Nation, and he's younger than I am, but older than the students that are currently there. So what we haven't figured out yet is actually what year he graduated, but I promised him that I would sign up for a brick. And anyway, that was really exciting to see an alum of our school district leading the state and the state board directors. He's currently sitting on the school board in Marysville. So anyway, that's Chris Nation. And I think that's what I have to share tonight.
Thank you. Director Gregory?
Thank you. Very briefly, I too want to commend the district on our communications work. I'm very impressed and think that it's beginning to tell a story that we all know has been here that we wanted to hear, and I think the public is going to be very excited about it. Secondly, I too am driving by Federal Way every morning, and it's really kind of fun to see what happens next. Thirdly, I wanted to just mention one of the things that has happened in the legislature, although we're going to be talking about legislation. There's one bill I thought might be of interest, and that is the House Education Committee passed a bill that delinks high-stakes testing from graduation. What it says is if you do not, that you have to complete your course requirements, you have to take the test. However, if you do not pass the test, then there will be time in your senior year to ensure that you are ready to at least start at a community college without having to take any classes over. And so it's a very interesting bill. I don't know where it's going. We had 3 assessment bills, and that's the one that is moving, and we'll watch it.
Thank you. Director Eto?
Yes, I'd like to talk about the roadmap meeting that I attended on the 11th of February. Just some of the things that I took away from that. They had the results printed up and had small workshops at the tables to go over some of the data. One of the things that struck me was the fact that the absenteeism in the schools is almost like a U-curve. It's very high in kindergarten, goes kind of down, and then it ramps back up by the 8th grade to about the same level. And I kind of wondered whether if that's an indication that parents are being dismissive about the child's early education. And anything that I've seen out of these roadmap meetings tells me that early education is really critical, even preschool. And so if there's anything that we need to do in terms of messaging for parents to understand that by losing 10% of the schooling at an early age is really detrimental and could be the reason why some kids get disconnected from the schools and end up losing engagement. So that information was a little interesting. The other point some folks talked about was whether or not students that have a home language speak Spanish or any other language and can read it are really illiterate. I mean, that's not really true in that the conversion and being able to extend those reading skills to English, it should be fairly easy. And so then we're talking about really vocabulary. And so if there's anything in terms of how we approach English language learners that could change how we perceive them and how they perceive that we're perceiving them as illiterate, could be a negative. And so that's something I think that should be looked at. There was a principal at Aki Kurose Middle School in Seattle who talked about, you know, the idea of what gets tracked gets done. She tracks those that are underperforming in her school by picture so that she can know these kids as she passes them in the hallway. And then as they move in terms of their math and reading skills and gets off of her picture book, it kind of gives her a sense of progress. And I thought that was a great idea that she had there. One of the persistent themes that I saw in the data was the idea that income is a great predictor. And so this idea that when a kid steps into school, there are no poor children, we need to do something there that equalizes it. And one of the things that I saw, and this was the following day, or that evening, going to the Federal Way High School planning night, was all the support mechanisms that we have for counseling, the AVID program, communities in schools, all these things that can help kids to, have a better self-image, really understand that they can make better achievement and can mentor them in terms of the possibilities, could maybe make that income gap a little smaller in terms of the impact in student achievement. But that really did stand out, is the fact that it seemed like the data was showing income is such a big factor, and that really shouldn't be. And so the schools need to be able to compensate for that, in my view. The planning night at Federal Way High School really pointed out we have great diversity in our schools. There's great support in our schools, and there's great choice. The thing, though, that I think we're working on, as Director Gregory pointed out in terms of our communications, is a marketing problem, and that resonates from when we visited the Puget Sound Skills Center. It's not that we don't have quality or quantity in terms of our choices, but I don't think the parents really know that those choices exist. And so if we can really emphasize the marketing aspect, I think we really have some great programs that parents and students can take advantage of. And that was really evident at that planning night, and I'm sure that was the case at all the high schools. I think those are the things that I wanted to cover. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll be the third to say that what we're seeing out of the communications department is phenomenal. I appreciate the work that's already been done in your short tenure here, and I've heard quite a few comments, so please keep up the great work. Talking about choice, I want to make sure that everybody is aware that secondary choice ends on Friday. If you want a choice out of your home school, going into middle school or high school, that is your deadline, so make sure that you make yourself aware of that and that you are on board if you want to choice elsewhere than what your home path is. The Grading Advisory Committee met last week. Things are starting to wrap up. We can see that there are a couple committees still in work and still in progress. I believe that there will be one more presentation made to the group next month, excuse me, that will probably then go on to the superintendent at that point. And then there's one other committee that I believe either next month or the following month, probably the following month, we'll do a presentation. And then at that point, it will be up to the superintendent and the cabinet to kind of present to the board next steps around what the grading advisory will be. As Director Peterson pointed out, tomorrow is the deadline for applicants for the superintendent process. We were informed last Tuesday that there were 19 completed applicants and 22 applicants in process. My guess, if I had to take a hit out of the park, is that we'll end up roughly with about 50 applicants probably when all is said and done. The process that will happen is that we will meet on the 7th in executive session to spend most of that day going through those applicants. Ray and Associates will present us the top 10 or 12 applicants, and we as a board will decide which of those applicants we'll interview, somewhere probably between 5 and 7. The week of the 16th, there's some things that are kind of in flux right now, but the week of the 16th, the board will spend a day interviewing, and then also at that point, it's decided on the 19th now instead of the 18th, so please note that the 18th was not available at City Hall, so we will be meeting on the 19th to decide who our final 2 or 3 applicants will be. For those of you that want to be involved in the process, there will be stakeholder meetings and open forum meetings that will happen the last week in March. Between the 25th and 27th is when it's tentatively done. Those will be ironed and completely figured out by the board on the March 10th meeting, but make sure that you check the website. All of that schedule is out there on the website under the superintendent search process. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Director Etter or myself as the board representation on the superintendent search committee. And that's all I have at this point.
Could I make one other
Sure.
additional comment?
Sure.
The one additional comment I would make is that I continue to hear of stories of children not having food. And I would urge all of us in the school system to really be on the lookout. I mentioned to Mark today that I heard from a community college who realized that their Running Start students who were on free and reduced meals, they found a young woman who was virtually having ketchup for lunch every day. And while we assume we're covering it all, that's the third time now that I've heard of a story of a child who's falling through the cracks. And we are expecting an awful lot of our children, and we need to be absolutely certain that they are fed. So it's just an alert to all of us, I think.
Thank you. So next, we will recess into a public hearing for reallocation on unspent bond funds. And Jeri Carlson will lead us through that.
Thank you, President McAnalloy, members of the board, Superintendent McLean. So for tonight's public hearing, I'd like to talk to you about a board resolution that was passed some time ago, back in 2007, Board Resolution 2007-03, and also talk about the requirements of RCW 28A.530.020. So let's kind of go back in time 8 years ago, back to February of 2007, when the board passed a resolution that authorized a special election that was going to be held for May of 2007. The election was for a bond proposition to be placed before the voters in the amount of $149 million, again back in 2007. The bond measure would support the rebuilding of 5 schools. You may recall Lakota Middle School, Lakeland Elementary, Sunnycrest, Valhalla, and Panther Lake. The measure also supported the relocation of the district support services centers, including transportation, maintenance and operations, as well as the central kitchen. And then it also provided just various funds for other capital improvements, such as heating, lighting, playfields, etc. The voters did approve that measure back in May of 2007, and accordingly the district went forward over the next 5 years, and we sold $139 million of the $149 million bond authorization in order to complete those projects. Also in that resolution, it included a district estimate that we would receive for state matching funds for those projects. At that time, we estimated it would be about $20 million. The district actually received about $32 million in state match funds for those projects. So that's what brings us here tonight for the public hearing and RCW 28A 530.020. So in order to use those remaining funds from the 2007 bond authorization for capital projects outside of the scope of what was in that original authorizing resolution, RCW requires us to hold a public hearing to consider the circumstances and to receive public testimony. And then at a later date, we would adopt an amending resolution to that resolution that was adopted back in 2007. You guys with me? Okay. I know some of you weren't on the board back in the time frame of 2011-12 when the planning was going on for the rebuilding of Federal Way High School and the capital projects levy that we put out before the voters, the $60 million that was going to support the rebuilding of Federal Way High School. However, you may recall that in those financing plans, the financing plans for Federal Way High did include to use some of the unspent funds from the 2007 bond authorization. So specifically for Federal Way High, it's a $106 million project budget. $56 million of that was going to come from the 6-year capital projects levy. $22 million would come from the unspent bonds and state match monies from the 2007 authorization. And then an additional $28 million was planned for what we would receive in state match funds for the rebuilding of Federal Way High School. So again, pursuant to the requirements of RCW 28A.530.020, the public hearing was advertised in the local newspaper and scheduled for tonight's meeting. The amending resolution, for which I did give you guys a copy via email, will actually be presented at the next board meeting of March 10th for adoption. So that concludes my comments.
Any questions from the board?
I just want to say, obviously this is just the great work that our business, services department does, and obviously Superintendent McLean was a part of that planning and this is just the nuts and bolts, and you guys just do a fantastic job of just keeping these things moving forward, and this is about being financially responsible and moving forward with the projects and the needs that we need to accomplish. So I thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Jeri.
Thank you.
And we'll now reconvene back to our regular meeting. Next item is to talk about INS 2, the Student Achievement Monitoring Report. Board members, you have it in your packet. And I'd like to open it up to discussion around the INS 2 report. Just a brief overview. I kind of followed what we did last month. We talked about the areas that were areas that we saw that we had made reasonable progress. Areas that we were below, I indicated under section 2 as areas just to be on watch. We know that everything is being reset because of ASPAC this year, so we don't have, we definitely need to look at how our INS 2 is written, because it talks about state standards, and there's not going to be state standards to go against next year. So we need to make sure that we are on board. I know part of the discussion later will be the presentation from the superintendent about some sub-ins that we can do, but we don't have state standards to follow anymore. We'll have state averages that we can compare against, but the overall arching INS 2 language needs to be updated.
Well, I appreciate the document. I appreciate the way it's put together. I think it reflects kind of our conversation. It reflects the celebration in the measurable objectives and the establishment of those, and also the movement that we have made. And I don't think it's a process and it takes time. So that's what I look for, is the growth over time. And I'll just put my plug in here that at some point I would love to start thinking about our kindergarten readiness data as well as a measure prior to 3rd grade, and whether it fits in here or not. It might look a little bit different, but how are children coming to us, and then kind of what work are we doing prior to 3rd grade at some point to figure out how we might even change that 3rd grade mark. So, but I appreciate the document and the single voice, and I think it reflects my interpretation of the end.
I just have one quick question. When you said state standards, do you mean state assessments?
Well, so it's, if we read INS 2, it talks about being compared against OSPI state standards, right?
I thought it said assessment.
It's not.
State. Just what?
Do we have it in here?
I'm sorry, I didn't read my book. Well, if so,
Yeah, each student at grade level will perform at or above state or district standards in all disciplines. So it's state, currently part of how we've looked at INS 2, and even part of what was presented to us, is comparing where our school is against those standards, right, of the averages.
Averages of the state
right,
tests.
Right.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
No, I too think it's well done. Thank you.
So if there's no further comments.
Actually, I actually just want to reiterate that as well. You know, this is just a good step of giving feedback. I appreciate that. The one thing in here, obviously, I don't necessarily know if it's needed in the report, but still for the consideration of the board, like we talked about in our work study of possibly simplifying the ends 2 statement to removing that last statement, which is more of a executive limitation than it is actually an end or a accomplishment of the first sentence being each student at every grade level will perform at or above the state or district standard in all disciplines. The second sentence of our end is each student's progress shall be measured annually by academic growth. Obviously that is, I don't know if the board wants to entertain that modification or now, or I know that came out through committee and that, but not necessarily pertaining to, it doesn't necessarily have to be noted in the report, but something moving forward.
Director Eto, do you have any comments? Make sure we
So
cover
is there a
everything.
motion?
That was what I was going to ask for next, but if there's not. So if there's a motion, I would entertain a motion at this time.
I move that the Board of Education approve ends 2 monitoring report.
You have a second?
I'll second.
A motion is second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. It's a lot easier than last month.
Making progress.
Yeah, we're making progress, exactly. Learning as I go. All right, next will be a discussion from Superintendent McLean around measurable objectives for the 2014-15 timeframe and some sub-ends we may look at being part of ends 2.
I know for the audience, I apologize that this is not legible from your TV screen, but at least you can get some frame of reference for the changes that the superintendent is recommending to you as our interpretation for measuring student achievement for this school year for 14-15. And we started defining the particular outcomes that we were seeking. Leadership team had done a draft. We presented that draft to the board back in November, I believe. We've rolled it out to all administrators, brought it back to a smaller group, rolled it back out to all administrators. And what we were working with had been the original framework, but recognizing that we're moving into a new state assessment model, recognizing also the fact that we don't believe everything can be quantified. So looking for a mix of qualitative and quantitative data to talk about student achievement. So we continue to be focused on reading and mathematics. You will note though that instead of looking at grades 3, 5, 8, and 10, we are looking at second grade, and I apologize, but 10th grade shouldn't be in here because the SBAC moves to 11th grade. And the high school pieces are looking at 9th grade and 11th grade now. So we're talking about data being reported on a continuously enrolled students using the same definition that the state uses for continuously enrolled students. And that will, well, we won't have cohort data to talk about this year because of the SBAC. Continuously enrolled will help us establish a benchline. We're talking about looking at 3 elements for elementary and middle school students in grades 2, 5, and 8 for reading and math. One is as we were talking about how do our classroom teachers own these goals, how do we make an ends relevant in the classroom and tied to the work that our teachers and principals are doing with the new teacher principal evaluation program and self-ID is what we're really trying to do is to assure that students are making academic growth. So what we're talking about is kids who come to us at grade level will continue to grow on pace, and kids who are below grade level will accelerate that learning, because if they stay on pace, if they theoretically gain a year and 9 months, which is always the miracle that happens in public education, But if they can gain more than a year in those 9 months, that helps closes the gap. Where if they just gain the same year that everybody else is gaining, they're still staying behind. So we're trying to accelerate that growth for our learners who come to us below grade level as measured by the STAR screener in reading and math. We also believe it's important to get a sense of students' attitudes about their learning. Are they enjoying reading? Are they engaged in math? Do they see that relevant to their lives? And for this year, the surveys are being piloted in 6 elementary and 3 middle schools, so we won't have survey data for all of our schools, elementary and middle schools, but we'll have that pilot group to share as part of our report on ends to tentatively next October. I know that calendar hasn't been set yet, but that's what we're aiming for. And then, of course, we can't ignore the fact that every school district and almost every student now in the school district does sit for a state assessment, the Smarter Balance Assessment, and that is a benchmark that school districts are held accountable to. And so part of what we'll be reporting on is the district's score on the elementary and middle school state assessments in reading and math. We will be striving to be at or above the state score. And I will reflect to you that currently we're below with the current measures of student progress. At high schools, we're really narrowing in on 2 places. One is that our kids are on track to graduate by the end of 9th grade. So we're measuring that based on their ability to achieve a certain amount of credit. Obviously, we're also moving into a 32 credit structure next year. So where we're a little soft right now is do we want them to achieve 6 credits because that's what they need in order to obtain a state diploma? Or are we looking at them to be on track and earn all 8 credits? And when you look at the data by individual students, you get some really different results. And we only have 2 schools, of course, that are at 32 credits right now. So that 70% number I know looks a little low, but it's still a stretch from where we are right now at the end of first semester. And then, of course, we're also looking for our 11th graders with our high school state assessment in reading or math to be at or above the state results. I will tell you that I will remind you that this year's 11th graders have already taken the 10th grade HISP, which is their graduation requirement. So if they've passed the HISP, there's not a real compelling reason for them to take the SBAC, but they are going through that exercise. So we'll see. The following year, we might look like we've made tremendous growth, but I would just remind people to keep things in perspective in terms of where our high school students are in terms of the suite of assessments they are taking. Obviously, this, as you just read in the monitoring report, that things that you were looking for the superintendent to include in these measurable objectives for the future, move into looking at our science requirements and potentially kindergarten readiness, and then both leaders and the board have talked about the fact that we need some really definitive measurable goals for our English language learners and our students who have individualized educational plans. So that's on the horizon, but in order to get us from step 1 to ultimately where we want to go, this is the intermediate step that we're offering to you as the data we would be delivering in regards to our results for 14-15.
Do you have any questions, Superintendent?
On the data for 2nd, 5th, and 8th, 10th, for some reason on the roadmap they focus on 3rd grade. Is there a reason why that's special for them and why we're not doing it?
3rd grade is a historical benchmark. At one point in time, when we first started state assessments, it was 4th, 7th, and 10th. And then the first state assessments are given to, the first grade is at 3rd grade, that the first state assessment is monitored. With the passage of engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5946, I'm not sure that's the right number. Okay. 2 years ago, that particular bill is pretty broad, but a piece of that bill talks about our learning assistance program funding and requires school districts to use those funds differently based on your third grade reading results. And quite frankly, we need to have a sense of where our kids are. We need to have some of that accountability in place in our system before you get to third grade. We need to have some sense of that at a district level. So that's why we propose moving it into the second grade. Even though there's not a state assessment for second grade, so when you see this data, what you'll see for second grade is only their individual growth on Fontes and Pinnell, most likely, or potentially STAR,
Yes.
and STAR math.
Yeah.
So reading the Fontes and Pinnell diagnostic assessment will show our progress for second grade students in reading, and it will still be the STAR assessment for math.
And Director McLean, if we were part of that collective impact and there's still reporting going on at third grade, it doesn't mean that we would not be able to report out on how our third graders were doing, correct?
Correct.
It just means that we're getting a handle on it earlier and have a year to make progress so that our third grade numbers would be even better than we'd like them to be.
Well, and remember, the dilemma is there's this much student achievement data.
Correct.
That much.
Correct.
I mean, we could fill the room
Right.
with
But I think
data.
as we talk about collective impact, and we know that, I'm just talking about what's happening in our own South County region and the fact that, you know, we are trying to make an impact geographically and not just by district. This doesn't upset the apple cart, if you will, about being able to report out on our third grade statistics at all.
No, it does not. Third grade
Thanks.
statistics will still be available.
And one thing I want the board to remember is that, you know, the requirement from legislation in third grade, it's very clear to me that we need to be ahead of the curve based on where we know our students are and give us that third grade year to get them up to make sure that we don't have to have discussions with parents possibly around testing out of the third grade level for smarter balanced. So. Any other questions?
So then, are we adding a test because we're testing already for third grade? So by going to this suite of tracking data, are we adding another assessment to the process?
No, our kindergarten, first and second grade students are already being assessed using Fontes and Pinnell and STAR, and I will look to Assistant Superintendent Verhar to clarify anything that I may have misunderstood.
Also, I think it would be important to just share at this point that we are responsible for sharing second grade data with the state. So second grade is a critical, pivotal year where we do present and report data to the state based on the Fontes and Pinnell scores. So at this point in time, that would be the assessment that we'd be using as part of this measurement as well, so it's not an additional test.
Thank you.
I will tell you, no doubt, our students are assessed a lot.
We don't need any more, that's the point.
Yeah.
Can I ask one other question? So I have one other question, and it has to do with the ads later on, which I really appreciate, the science, K-readiness, ELL, and IEP pieces. And with ELL, the conversation about once students graduate out of that cell, then they're no longer, you know, as we can't count them any longer, and we report to the state, don't we, on the number of students that are still in that ELL
Yes,
cell?
the official term is referred to as monitored, and we do continue to monitor students who have been exited from supports for English language acquisition.
So do we, okay, so that was my question. So even though we don't report that out, or have to report that to OSPI, do
Actually,
we?
they started funding like 2 years ago now, so I think there's more reporting requirements
So do
now.
we track, I mean, I guess my question is, do we track students ourselves within our own district on their continued growth and progress, even though they may have exited out of ELL because of whatever? But we know that they still are dual language or ELL students. Do we keep track of them, or do we look at their continued growth or progress, or once they're no longer deemed an ELL student by the cell they're in, do we keep that information? Do you know what am I asking a question that makes any sense?
I will have to double check with the director of ELL, Judy Lemmel,
Okay.
unless Marie Behar knows the answer off the top of her head.
We do not officially track it in terms of students who are exited. However, every school knows who those students are, and so they're very careful in their data monitoring and progress monitoring and reporting to ensure that students are continuing to make the necessary growth. So they're not required necessarily to report anything to us, although I know as a former principal, we monitored those students very, very closely, even though they had reached what we call level of proficiency and were exited.
Because I think, again, that's a important statistic for us, that even though that we as a board understand that there's students that fit here, but we know about the diversity of our district, and it would be an interesting piece of data just to kind of keep track of continued progress at some point. And again, it certainly isn't number one on the priority list, but as we unpack more and more about who our children are and the struggles they have, I think it would help us look to see how we're doing in that continued support once they've exited out of official programs. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
Thank
really,
you.
that was really my paragraph, is that and I pointed out the 37% is just not this year by any means, right? But just in the long, as we look down the 3 to 5 year process, that is an area absolutely the board's concerned about and
Thanks.
call out. One other question I have is just around the 6 versus 8 credits. For me, I think it's 6 credits because we're really basing it against the 24, and I know that there's still some nebulous decision around what are we going to require. But for me, since we're doing some measures, I'd like at some point for us to kind of decide what that's going to be. If it's 6 or 8, I lean towards the 6 because that's really a state standard, and we can measure it against that. And we may change it down the road, but I just don't want to get 6 having 6. So the 9th grade. So 70% of 9th grader students will be earning credits in all courses. Right, so it's that piece where we talked about, the 24 versus 32, that requirement. And to me, if the state requirement is to have 24, then I would hope that 70% would be based against a 9th grade of six credits. And then as we move on,
And what we proposed at the time was all, but we recognize that we're in a changing landscape right now related to new graduation requirements for the class of 2019.
Makes sense.
So.
Great, thank you.
We'll probably report it both ways.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I think Danny hit on the point, and it is here again, and that is our use of words. Now that we've got Common Core standards, we keep using the term standards, and I think as a board we need to, or as a group, we need to figure out what we're talking about.
In the ENDS language
Well,
itself?
in the ENDS language, and then I saw one other place, I thought. Maybe not.
It's down below, it says state results instead of standards, right? Under that one, district scores of elementary.
Okay.
It will be state results. So it's more of an average instead
But I
of a
think that's
standard.
just something the board needs to think about. And Danny, you had some language. So when we talk about standards versus, what does standards mean versus assessments versus whatever? Thank you.
One more point of clarification. Are we still getting the data by demographic group?
Yes, sir. Plenty of work to do there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point, the board needs to have a discussion around how we would like to move forward with the end statements. So I open it up for discussion.
Move forward being what
Well, if there's, we can make a motion, exactly what language we want, what changes we want to make to ends 2. Are we adding sub-ends?
I would like to make a motion to amend, actually not to amend. I'd like to make a motion to strike the second sentence of ends to each student's progress shall be measured annually by academic growth.
Will you repeat that, please?
I move to strike the sentence, each student's progress shall be measured annually by academic growth from ends to.
And you had proposed that earlier, had you not, in
Yes.
in our conversation? Okay, I remember that.
So we have a motion, do I hear a second?
I second that motion.
Discussion.
And just to clarify, what are the benefits of removing that?
I think like with everything we're doing now, it's just clarity, and and for the true statement of an end statement, I think that doesn't add to it or subtract from it. I think it's just kind of this is just a housekeeping item that I think will just bring further clarity. I think tonight too, as we've been talking about the measurable goals, that really will be a great focus to have there, so.
Is this the one you suggested was an EL?
Yeah, this possibly could be considered, it's just
Just a
how we do it now. It's not a goal that we reach, it's just
No, it's a
how we
process,
measure.
yeah.
Process, so, yeah, thank you.
I guess if I would reconcile it in my mind, we would be striking that because basically we've spelled it out in sub-ends, and therefore it's kind of a superfluous statement.
Yes, yeah,
good.
it's a process, yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? So we'll just do this piece first, so let's
I was
do-
just saying striking it doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't change the end at all.
No,
So
I
as
don't-
long as, our outcome is still there and
Yeah,
it's just
Yeah,
almost.
regardless, we're doing annual,
Yeah,
gathering of data, so.
So just to clarify, at this point, all we're doing is talking about the overarching comment on the end, not anything else.
Correct.
So the motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and now we have a proposal of sub-ends that we need to discuss.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the measurable objectives for 2014-15, noting that under sub-end measurable objective, the first statement that it would be 258 and 10th would be stricken from that statement.
2, 5, and 8.
And the rest would be as written.
So I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I second it.
Discussion.
One other thing I'm considering, just amending that motion, it was a great motion, is the whole idea of delineating the sub-ends of A, B, C, D, and E. There's 5 different objectives that are stated in there. And just for clarity's sake, for reporting out and all that kind of stuff, to have ends 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, and 2E. So I guess if I'm seeing some nods, but I would like to amend the motion.
Friendly amendment is accepted.
Okay.
A second? Do we have a second?
Yes, I second it.
All right, so the motion is second to amend the measurable objectives to be 2A, 2B, C, D, and E. So 2A would start with the students who perform, 2B would be increase the percentage, 2C the district score, 2D 70%, and 2E the district score. Discussion?
President McAnalloy.
Yes.
I just want to point out that under measurable objectives, where we indicate that data will be reported on continuously enrolled students, we need to strike end 10th, because this was really geared for 2, 5th, and 8th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Director Wilson put that in.
Okay,
Motion.
sorry.
It's okay, no problem.
And the reason that we're striking 2, 5, 8, and 10.
We're doing the motion to adding
Okay.
the sub-ends, right?
Yeah, right now we're just doing, to add, the motion right now on the floor is to add the sub-ends to
Okay.
A through E.
All right.
Discussion around that? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And now we'll go back to the main motion, which was to accept them, striking out 10. Director Ratto is all we'll strike out, so it'll be 2, 5, and 8. So it was just a typographical error because the measurable objectives for high school are down below. So elementary and middle are separated out, and high school is down below. So those measurable objectives are at the top that will apply to A, B, and C. And then the 10th grade really doesn't strike, it's under high school now for D and E.
It's just a error in the writing. Doesn't change.
So we need discussion around the motion on the floor.
I'm not sure I fully understand that. I understand why we're taking 10 out, because we won't be measuring it at 10th grade. But aren't we measuring at 11th grade? And I don't see where 11th grade is in D and E.
Well, the high school assessment is delivered at the 11th grade now, so it's presumed.
So it's just a presumed, okay. Okay, thank you.
So again, earlier, I thought I had heard Director Wilson's want to strike 258. That's not correct.
No, I was just asking to strike 10.
Okay.
It was just taking that out since it was not in the right spot. And remaining, 2, 5, and 8 would remain as written.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Great work, board. Thank you. All right, next will be legislative reports. And I believe Deputy Superintendent Davidson will start us in this discussion.
Thank you, yes.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let me get my... Oh, shoot. Okay. Sorry. You got it? Oh, there it is. There we go. Thank you. And that brings it up. Thanks. Thank you for the technical assistance. Good evening, President McAnalloy. By the way, I just love being at these other events where people look at you and go, it's President McAnalloy. And members of the board, Superintendent McLean, gives me great pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to you tonight about our legislative report. I have some kind of, I guess, bare bones sorts of structural things that I'm talking about to start with in terms of the legislature. And we're going to be focusing tonight on our state process and not on anything else. So some important dates for this session. I haven't included everything, but the first day, of course, was January 12th. The last is supposed to be April 26th, and in between there are some other important dates, one of which we've already passed, which is that the first cutoff date, all bills that must be adopted by their original House or Senate committee, policy committee, to remain alive at that point. So quite a few things went down into the hopper away from the legislature last Friday. On February 27th, which is this Friday, fiscal bills are in the same boat, those that were not yet adopted in those original fiscal committees in House and Senate. Again, the place where they originated will no longer be alive either. And then the last day, I think I left off that last day somehow. I looked at this thing a million times today and see that the last day to consider bills in House of Origin, I think, is March. I'm trying to remember the exact date there, but it is in March. And so those are important things to remember as we go through. But as you will see in just a second, there's always a caveat there. And that caveat is that there is no bill that's truly dead until the gavel hits the desk at the end of the session. And there is always a way to revive potentially dead legislation at any point. Legislators have that privilege to do so as they move through the process, and there are ways to do that. And it seems like to me every year there's something that comes back, whether it's education related or not, there's always something that comes back at some point late in the session. The astounding number there is that over 2,200 bills, resolutions have been proposed this year. I think that's somewhere over 15 per legislator, if I remember seeing that statistic correctly. It's been a distraction at the beginning of the session while we're waiting for the money issues to be discussed very seriously, I think. There's lots of stuff that comes. And remember, I think it's important, people kind of forget that the whole point of legislation is that you put lots of stuff out there and that you don't want to see all of that passed. I remember listening to Dan Grimm, who at the time I think maybe was a state treasurer back when I was getting my master's degree, and he talked about what would you just imagine if all those passed every time, what that would be like. So I think that's a great reminder to us. People have pet projects, there's good ideas, there's bad ideas, and that the whole point of the process is that they need to get through the entire process to become law. Budget-related bills and the bills considered necessary to implement the budget, which I believe they call NITB. They actually have an acronym down there for those bills because you have things that you have to do in order to make these happen. And they're exempt from these early cutoff dates, really have their own dates as you move through the session. The revenue projection, in the past it's been in March. This year there was a temporary measure to start having mid-February revenue projection. There's also a bill that's not yet passed that would be the norm in the future, which probably would make sense given that there's a need to know earlier what revenue projections look like. As you can see, last Friday was that projection, and there was a total of around $236 million additional revenue that's coming into the state as we're in better economic times. 106 million of that, or 107 basically in the current biennium, which ends at the end of June this year, and then around 129 million for the next biennium, which again is the 2015-2017 two-year period. So that looks like a nice number, right, until you look at the overall revenue at the bottom and see that it's $36.5 billion. So it's a very kind of drop in the bucket. I didn't do the math there, but it's a small percentage, as we know. So it's good news, though, certainly much better than, what was it, probably 5 years ago, Sally, when we were looking at continued deficits every time there was a revenue projection. There's always three budgets, right? The governor's budget, which always comes early, the first one. And then the House and Senate alternate. So this year it's the House's turn to release the budget first. It's not scheduled for release until late March, even with the earlier revenue prediction. It was Ross Hunter, Representative Hunter, from the east side, who is the man in charge of the revenue side of the House, has said that there's just not going to be enough information to prepare a budget any earlier than it originally would be out. So again, everyone's awaiting that. It's still approximately 4 weeks away at this point, or about a month away. The Senate budget, of course, comes after the House this year, and then next year that'll flip-flop. And of course, what sometimes folks forget also is that, of course, the House and Senate must agree, and the governor sign this thing, and that's the work. That's what folks do down there. A fascinating process to me. I think my main thoughts at this point is that it's really still very early in the session. We still have 2 full months, even if this session were to be extended, which is likely given the money issues that are occurring, the demands on the budget, and that nothing's been decided yet. There's been nothing that's passed both houses and gone to the governor for signature. So we are at a point now where everything is still on the table, whether it be legislation or budget items. And so I think that's a good lesson for us.
There are actually a very few things that have gone forward.
Can we get through some
There's a
stuff?
supplemental budget and some work on mental health.
Thank you. And I think it's wise that, of course, we have our alphabet soup of education organizations, right, that exist. We all work pretty well together for our common cause, but two particularly, actually three, work together. WASA, which is the Washington Association of School Administrators, WASDA, which is the State School Directors Association, school board members, and then, of course, WASBO, which is the Association of Washington or Education Business Officials. And in fact, this coming weekend, Sunday and into Monday, is our annual conference in Olympia. Those three organizations cooperating together will be meeting, having opportunities to meet with legislators, having an opportunity to meet with the governor, at least at a social event, and a chance to talk with each other in this very broad spectrum of people from all over the state about education issues, which I'm excited to have the opportunity to do. I think it's wise to point out that most of our priorities are really quite similar. And I'll just quickly read those. I decided not to put them on a slide, but the School Directors Association priorities, as you know, are to amply fund K-12 education, facilitate facilities, and I think what that means, again, really is just think about the needs we have for buildings. If you think about all the needs that we have, there was an excellent editorial in the Times today. The Seattle Times took the position that there needs to be a change in simple majority for bonds as well. Highline just failed one, and they have 90-year-old buildings there, 2 90-year-old buildings that they are not able to renovate or knock down and start over like we've done with Federal Way High. So that's an astounding thing, and that's a fairly normal occurrence across the state. There's a huge backlog of facilities needs. Enable great teaching and learning, just the amount of professional development that we need throughout our system is enormous, as well as covering the cost of materials and supplies. Fully funding programs and services that are required by law. Special education is a great example. We have very clear guidelines about what we're supposed to do in special education without the funding, the underlying funding to do all of it. And then no new mandates, an interesting piece. And I think, in my opinion, that from WASDA, that means not just unfunded mandates, that means any mandates. Give us time to implement the reforms that are already here that will take us where we need to go. The WASA, the Washington Associated School Administrator platform, is comply with the paramount duty, which goes right back to amply fund K-12 education. Sally will be talking, I believe, Superintendent McLean will be talking about a couple of important laws there, I believe. Expanding available state resources. That's not on the WASDA list, but it is on the WASA list, and that's thinking about additional revenue. And then finally, ensuring competitive public school employee compensation. That's an area of neglect that, again, will link up with what the superintendent talks about shortly. So do you have any further questions at this time, or any questions for me? Thank you, Director Gregory, for your information about some bills that have passed. Okay.
Any comments or questions? Thank you, Deputy Superintendent.
Thank you.
Superintendent McLean?
I think I'll just speak from here because I don't think my handout is going to be legible, so sorry about the microphone. I really just wanted to reinforce my strong belief that the state needs to wrestle with the challenge of making ample provision for the education of all children in the state of Washington. This is not an easy process, and it's not going to be an easy process. Long before the state Supreme Court hearing, which is often referred to as the McCleary decision, when Washington, there were 3 lawsuits filed in the early part about 10 years ago. One was directly from Federal Way, one was a group of school districts around special education funding, and then we had the News lawsuit. So the discomfort or the dissatisfaction with the 1977 funding formulas was evident at the legislative, in our legislative branches and in the governor's mansion. And there was a study, yet another study, that was conducted around K-12 funding, and the Pikus and Auden report was released, and it had a very significant price tag on it. The Pikus and Auden report indicated that the state was underfunding public education for about $4 billion, by about $4 billion. The Quality Education Council got created and they passed 2 bills, basically, not just the Quality Education Council, but the Quality Education Council created a new funding formula that came through Substitute House Bill 2261. It's often referred to as the prototypical school model. And it's a 45-page funding formula now instead of a 9-page funding formula. But it changed, and it created various components that recognized the changes that had occurred in public education. For example, one of the things I would have always talked to our voters about as we went out with the EP&O is that when the 1977 funding formula was created, there was no technology in schools. Well, maybe for processing payroll in the larger school districts, but there was virtually no technology in schools. There was no need for school security. I mean, those are 2 just really concrete examples of how things have changed around the operations of education, not to mention the content of education. So the prototypical funding model got created, and then knowing that was going to have an approximately $4 billion price tag, the other piece of legislation that got passed was, I'm not going to remember now if it was an engrossed substitute or a second engrossed substitute House bill, but it's 2776 that references the funding timeline. So there were certain commitments that the state made through 2776 to fund the prototypical school model between now and 2017-18. And basically those got created into sort of some chunks. All-day kindergarten, reduced class size, MSOC, materials, supplies, and operating costs. And the hope at the time was that the revenue streams, wherever those magical revenue streams were going to come from, would be significant enough to make some annual increases to public education. Okay, this all happened before the Great Recession, or just as the Great Recession was breaking upon us. So then we kind of entered 5 years of, let's see if we can just kind of hang on. Then the McCleary decision was passed during that time frame too. So and this isn't really just this isn't really just our elected officials' problem. This is a problem for the citizens in the state of Washington, because while I know there are some opinions that believe we can just restructure our current state expenditures, I believe personally that will come at the cost of social services and higher ed. And I don't think that helps fix public education for the citizens of the state of Washington. So I am hopeful that many courageous conversations will occur that will continue to move us forward. And a commitment has been made by the legislature towards funding McCleary. The argument is that it's far away from the commitment that needs to be made to reach the level of funding by 2017-18 that we believe the Washington State Supreme Court has required based on the testimony provided in front of the Supreme Court. Big numbers, $4 billion is a big number, so let me just kind of break that down for you all in terms of what that means for Federal Way. With the 14-15 school year, the school year we're in now, the state average funding is about $7,700 per student. I will just tell you we get less than that, but that's the history lesson for Tuesday. If we got $7,700 per student from the state, the goal in 17-18 based on the testimony, there's 2 numbers. One includes a significant change in statewide salaries for K-12 employees. That would bump our per pupil allocation to $12,700. That's roughly a $5,000 per student increase per year. And when you multiply that across 22,000 students, that's $110 million. So that's the way $4 billion scopes for us, or $5 billion with the salary study. $110 million by the time we get to 2017-18 if McCleary is funded, based on where we are today. If you back out the salary changes, what you're looking at is about a $2,000 per student increase from the current $7,700 to about $9,710, and even a $2,000 increase in per pupil allocation and state funding drives $44 million into the district, which helps address things like ongoing building maintenance, curriculum, technology, and all the host of things that we struggle to balance our resources around. So, my drum, I know that people are getting tired of hearing that drum. And with all due respect, Representative Gregory, fund McCleary. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
I would just add that we will be well represented in Olympia this weekend because Superintendent McLean and Assistant Superintendent Davidson would be there, but also President McAnalloy will be there in his role as WASDA Ledge rep, and I'll be there in my role as Ledge liaison for the district, and Representative Gregory will be there in her role as representative. So I think all things point to good things for Federal Way myself. I will say that today Senator Fain came out with a little 57 seconds on McCleary, if anyone is interested in getting a less than 60-second lesson on what McCleary is. And clearly the issue is, and the challenge is, that we cannot have an education-only budget. When Director Gregory talks about a young person that has ketchup for food, and when we have families who don't have basic needs, clearly we have some real challenges, and it's going to take individuals with children and families and the good of our state in the middle of the conversation in order to move this forward in a different way. I will, the only other thing that I will say is when I was at Leadership WASDA this weekend and was able to talk to the delegation that just had gotten back from DC, the one thing that I thought was interesting is they were very well received this time around in their conversations around the ESCA reauthorization, No Child Left Behind. And that Senator Murray's been doing a lot of work, but there was a lot of interest by the other delegates that are there. Reichert among one, that's an interesting, because he's not necessarily been interested so much before, but that they really felt very different in their, the responses that the delegation gave them than they'd had experienced previously. So there may be some good things coming from the federal landscape as well.
So the last component, the last piece tonight is that, as Vice President Wilson shared, there will be quite a few of us going down this weekend. And we will caucus on Sunday. WASDA leads this. I guess we take turns between the three organizations. It's WASDA that leads. And part of what we haven't done as a board is really discussed what our platform is and what we believe in. And I want to make sure that we don't just represent WASDA when we go this weekend. So I'd like to open it up to discussion from the board about how we feel and what things we want to say. As Director Superintendent Davidson shared, there are 5 legislative priorities that have been established by WASDA. That's part of what the 24 of us do. So it was previous. I got elected in November. So we'll start this process in May for what the priorities will be for next year. But I want to make sure that if we are not completely aligned with this voice, that for those of us that are meeting with legislators, all of us that are going, that we make sure that Federal Way is represented as well. So I just open it up at this point to the directors to discuss that, if there's anything that we need to do. I mean, we've heard clearly from Superintendent McLean, it's about funding McCleary, and I think we all believe that, but is there anything else that's outside of that?
Well, the only other thing I'll put on the table and that I at a table would have a conversation around would be the early start bill, which is again related to early learning, but in that also deals with our before and after school programs and quality rating, if you will, or licensing of those before and after school programs, which has got a fiscal note to it. And the early start bill is just increasing the number of early childhood slots of the state-funded program across the state by 6,000. There's been some changes in that, but that would be something in our conversation around moving our gap and our families and our children forward, be something that I would want to put out on the table.
You know, we had a group of, I think it was 3 classes from Twin Lakes Elementary down, and Linda Kochmar and I were talking with them, and one of the things I asked them was, how many of you plan to go to college? And virtually every hand went up, and I thought, great, we're doing our job. And then I thought, and where are they going to go, and how are we going to afford it? Higher education is the third piece or the third leg of that stool, and we have really dismantled it, particularly for our middle-class kids whose parents thought they were saving for their kids' college education, only to find out that since 2007, costs have just skyrocketed. And so I really think that that's another piece that doesn't hurt us to talk about is, you know, you're making these, you're setting expectations through Common Core and other mandates for higher education of some form, and how's that going to be addressed in this state? Because it is equally as dismantled as many of our other programs.
You know, President McAnalloy presents a really interesting question as to, you know, what is our messaging toward the legislature? And it kind of comes back to us then to have a consistent idea on what it is that we want to accomplish as a board. And I know we had a discussion last week at the work study about strategic planning and integrating policy governance. So I think that's going to be a longer dialogue. It's certainly not going to be something that's going to be coming off the top of our heads, but something that we have to talk about, because everything that we want to do in terms of initiative that would create better outcomes for the students is likely going to cost more money. And so, you know, if we have a consistent message that we can give for the things that we want to get accomplished, then we all need to agree as a board that those are the things that we need. And I don't know that right now we really have things that we could all say that we really understand amongst each other and would want to push. But that's a great question.
I would just say that it's very, very clear that the history of the board has not been to be actively engaged in creating resolutions, supporting resolutions, or putting resolutions out there. There have been that, but they've been more a private resolution than they have been a board resolution. And they have, I would say they have positively impacted Federal Way, and one would be the academic acceleration. However, the board itself wasn't part of really putting that resolution out there. And so, and being actively involved in WASDA, which we've not been either, there is a very clear process that happens, as President McAnalloy addressed, where there's a whole resolution process as boards that happen beginning in May in order to set the legislative priorities and to have those conversations before the legislature ever even comes into session. And so we are coming on the back end of WASDA's work and of other board directors across the state whose boards have put resolutions forward. And I think that's a hope that I know that I have as a board member, and I know that others on the board hold as well, that we will increase our participation and also our influence around those kinds of resolutions and policies then that impact educational outcomes for our kids.
The only other thing I would suggest that you might want to think about is the role of the local school district in McCleary versus the state, because McCleary really gives money to school districts to make decisions, with the state having a broad framework. And when you have 2,200 bills, you've worked hard at solving every problem and restructuring every classroom. So we just need to keep that in the forefront of people's minds, that the job is now going to be even more heavily on the school districts to take this money, use it in the way they feel is necessary to meet the standards. not to restructure it again. And that's a hard conversation to have, because everyone who comes before the legislature or is a legislator has a good idea. And that's going to be a change. And we've always done it that way in this state. And so this is really changing how we really look at the responsibility of the local school district. And that hasn't sunk in yet.
I just want to say, I think it's for me, just watch it. We talked, Superintendent Davidson talked about how, where we're at a few years ago and the budget cuts and that, and where we're at now with funding and those kinds of things. And I remember the years of the 30 million cuts and that kind of stuff, and where we're in a different spot now, thank goodness. And I'm just excited right now to see where we're at as a board, that there's opportunity right now to have great conversation, and that we're there, we're going to be represented, and I think that's fantastic. For me, I think it's definitely there will always be talk and continue to be talk about education, but for me, it's about the achievable outcomes that we can really find. And I think Director Wilson brought up, that point tonight about how there's lots of things in play. It's not just education, but at the same time too. I think we can definitely bring that federal way flair to the conversation. We know that all funding is not equal, that there's disproportionate funding. That Superintendent McLean continues to bring up. That all districts aren't being funded equally, and just how can we really contend for our students, the people here in our community, and so I'm just excited, and I know that all the answers don't come necessarily with us. I'm excited for the dialogue that happens, where ideas that we weren't even considering just happen in that, because we're there, we're talking with other districts, other people, legislators, that whole thing, and what information and what perspective the three of you will bring back from those times of discussion. I'm excited for that. So it's a good place, it's a good time, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be there and be involved. So thank you.
So, this was my hope tonight, is that in the year and a quarter that I've served on the board, there really hasn't been conversation. And I hope that we can continue this conversation. As I shared in May, is when that first piece goes. There are 109 priorities that are set on WASDA, and they prioritize those down to these are the top 5. And every year they do that. And so what you've all said is what I hope will happen over the next 2 years as I serve. The other 3 representatives out of District Area 2, which actually is 1/3 of the legislative districts, right? It's all of King County. There are 16 of the 49 that sit out of Director Area 2. The representation of the other 3 are all north. So that's part of why we talked about it this year, that we needed to have some South End representation, because life in South King County is much different than it is in other areas. And I believe that part of my role in that is to make sure that we have voice as we go forward, and that we are looking at if there are resolutions we need to do or things we need to go through as a process. We will meet in May, in June, and in July to set before we go before the Legislative Assembly in September. So I do want to make sure that we begin to have that flair, right? We begin to have voice for Federal Way. We begin to have priorities that we have as a board that we want, as we talk possibly about a strategic plan, that we have things move forward and we impact. Our board does everything we can to impact things in the legislature that will benefit our 22,000 students. So we'll go down and represent well this weekend, and I'm glad that we've begun the conversation, and there will be more to come. So thank you. All right, next on our agenda, Superintendent McLean, EL 16 Policy Governance Calendar Modification.
Well, first I want to sincerely apologize. You're not having a deja vu moment. I did, at the last board meeting, actually ask you to amend the policy governance calendar with the a short-sighted expectation that we would be presenting Executive Limitation 16 this evening. I failed to take into account that one of our key data analysts had been scheduled for a medical leave, and so we are unable to present that this evening. I am asking that you would amend the calendar to move the presentation of EL 16 to March 24th. And I won't ask again.
I so move.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to move EL 16's presentation to the March 24th board meeting. Any discussion?
I also know too, that came out of the committee that there was certain recommendations that were possibly discussed for EL 16, and so I know we're not voting on that tonight, but I'm hopeful that maybe part of that will be, you know, the superintendent's feedback on some of what came from that, and if there are any changes to EL 16 that we do want to make. So,
any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. And unfortunately, our Mark Kopeng just left for a minute. The superintendent search committee did meet last Thursday, and Mr. Kopeng was going to present the findings to the board. There is a document from him in your packet, kind of discussed the things. So, oh, there he is. Okay. And without further ado, Mr. Kopeng. I was trying to delay install a little bit.
I guess I expected Superintendent McLean to be a little more long-winded, so. Well, President McAnalloy and directors, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee and myself for the opportunity that you've given the community to speak into the superintendent search process. I think that the efforts that you've made have been admirable, and I think demonstrate your commitment to doing it right. So thank you for that. Also want to express my appreciation to you, Superintendent McLean, for your efforts in the interim. I think that you've done a good job riding the ship, and I know there's a lot of positive energy in the school district because of your efforts. I'm presenting a report on the meeting that we had last Thursday. It was a meeting that consisted of the applicants for the superintendent search committee that were not selected to participate. Prior to the close of the application process, they were still given an opportunity to weigh in before interviews take place. So I think that's a very positive thing, and certainly gives them voice as members of that group of applicants that expressed such a desire to be a part of this process. The first quality that was discussed in our meeting, and discussed with some passion, was around academic rigor. And the fact that there are some concerns on the part of some of the parents that there is not enough rigor currently in the Federal Way School District for our students, that they're not adequately being prepared for college. And while I don't have any definitive proof to that point, it was definitely a point that was expressed multiple times. I think that they really want to see a superintendent that really stresses getting a basic understanding of the subject matter required to be successful in their college careers. Some additional qualities that they discussed were, surprisingly enough, a willingness to live in the district. I think that oftentimes we remember the things we don't like when we are thinking about the new person we want to come in. And I think there's a level of commitment that comes with living in the district that was very important to the people that attended that meeting. Also wanted to see an atmosphere of innovation within the school district. There's so many different ways that learning can take place now, so many different mechanisms that can be employed to engage our students, and they'd like to see a superintendent that is willing to look at new things while maintaining the balance and the rigor that's required to get our students the education they need. They wanted to see a commitment to academic programs such as AP, Cambridge, the International Baccalaureate Program, and to ensure that those are meeting the nationally accepted standards. There was some concern that we're currently not meeting those standards. And again, I can't speak to that, but that was a point that was made. They also would like a superintendent that is willing to really study the surrounding districts with similar demographics and learn from their successes as well as their failures to ensure that Federal Way does continue down a path of success in engaging the students. They want someone who is not focused solely on advancing their career, but really is truly committed to making a long-term commitment to the Federal Way School District and the school district's success. They want to see a support for, or see a superintendent that has a track record of being able to deal with difficult personnel decisions. I think in light of some of the challenges that occurred in the last tenure or last administration, that's something that came front and center. They really want to see somebody that's positive in engagement, more proactive, and basically able to handle issues before they become big. I want to support for all college-bound students, not just the students in AVID or other specialized programs. They'd like to see a superintendent that has some familiarity with the special needs programs. They'd really like to see some transparency with the teachers, with the staff, and also with the parents and guardians. They would like to have a superintendent that really understands childhood development and can speak to the specific needs in every age group, or can definitely at least be familiar with the discussion around those issues. Promotion of parental involvement is something that I think is very important to that group, and something that I think is definitely would provide some support to the teachers. And another quality was a willingness to support low achieving students without sacrificing the high achievers in the process. So, and the willingness to have more substantive interaction with the district parents.
I had just a question. As I'm obviously right now, you're going through the list that we have right here. With two questions. One is, how many people, I know we invited all those that applied to this, but how many people were in this room that were giving us feedback?
I didn't take exact rolls. So
What's the guess?
It was
5,
25.
What? How many?
About 25.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah,
and then my next question is obviously you were part of the committee that looked at this. What was your perspective as the chair? What was similar and what was different from the feedback that you received from your committee and this one? Do you feel like they were pretty much in the same vein, or is there some highlights that you have that kind of stick out to you that was different, a different side to the voice that you saw this time around?
I think that the difference between what we did last week and what we did a month ago was that that discussion a month ago was a lot more directed. Really looking at the positive things within the district, positive things with it, just basically looking at, it was a shaped discussion to come with an outcome that we needed to fulfill for the brochure to be published. This discussion, I prefaced the discussion, first of all, by thanking them for attending and then letting them know that there was no timetable and they could speak as long as they wanted to, and I'd be there to listen and take notes. So with that in mind, I got to hear a lot. I got to hear probably more than I'd heard in previous meetings, and I heard it with more passion. In that, as the parents were able to really engage on the subjects that they were there to represent, we heard more. Now again, I think that many of the things that I heard, you have all heard before.
So were these, you didn't do the questions that were done with all the other focus groups? This was just come together and tell us whatever you want to tell us about anything, really?
So part of what we said as the platform was to let's discuss what qualities we came up with, the quality and characteristics, and then share anything that was outside of that you wanted to give voice to. So it did give it some levity that, unfortunately, it then becomes kind of personal things that may be issues with the district.
But again, I think it was important for that group in particular to really be heard, and so I wanted to give them the opportunity. Not everyone took advantage of that opportunity. A lot of things there was a few that didn't speak at all because I assume what they came to speak about was represented by somebody else. So.
No, and I appreciate that. You know, I just the context of what we're seeing, that's fantastic. You know, obviously it wasn't, do we all vote and say that these are the qualities? It was just an opportunity to get feedback, and, you know, I appreciate that. And I think anytime you're able to just get a, you know, there's always different voices, different perspectives in the community, and so is another good opportunity just for us to get feedback. And I appreciate you taking the time that evening for this report. So, yeah.
I think the final observation is it's clear that the choice of the new superintendent, a new superintendent is very important to the applicants that were able to attend. While there was a number of qualities listed that were similar to those already contained in the recruitment brochure, the additional opportunity to participate in the process was valuable in that it gave the participants an opportunity to make specific observations based on personal experiences and their observations. A substantial portion of the conversation during the meeting scheduled included discussions around frustrations experienced in the recent past. They were substantive enough to motivate action and remain a concern. One of the points brought up that the board should be especially aware of is the perceived need for more substantive forums for interaction with the parents and guardians. The desire among the participants for increased collaboration and partnership between the parents and the district was a constant message. To the board's credit, the level of communication or community outreach during the superintendent search process has been commendable and has been appreciated. The participants expressed an interest in a similar ongoing effort of community engagement by the future superintendent and board. The willingness of the new superintendent to remove themselves from the quote-unquote ivory tower of the ESC and interact directly with the parents outside the ESC is something worthy of consideration when the board makes its final choice on a new superintendent. Okay.
Thank you. Mark, I want to thank you for going through this process.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Questions?
No, I just want to thank you too, and the extra steps we put you through.
Happy
Appreciate
to do it.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's very important for our community to get the right superintendent. So glad to be a part of the process.
Yeah, thank you for yours.
From the board, I just want to thank you for allowing the process to happen. I've heard quite a few positive comments that this did go a long way to allow them to have a place to voice, and so thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. And at this point, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.